All right, welcome everybody to session 3 of our Research in Schools webinar today. And joining us for session 3 is Ryan Bishop, a colleague of mine from Brisbane School of Distance Education, currently working in the department like me in a different capacity. And he's going to talk to us today about teacher action research. But before we begin, we would like to do an acknowledgement of country. So the Department of Education acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands across Queensland. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across the state. A better understanding and respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures develops an enriched appreciation of Australia's cultural heritage and can lead to reconciliation. This is essential to the maturity of Australia as a nation and fundamental to the development of an Australian identity. With no further ado, welcome Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. Can you please just pop in the chat a thumbs up or a hello or a yes if you can see my presentation, and we'll get started. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So yeah, my name's Ryan Bishop. I'm the Head of Department Teaching and Learning at the Brisbane School of Distance Education, and I've been invited along today to talk to you about teacher action research, which is an initiative that we implemented into a very large online school back in 2018. So my intention today is to provide you with our school context, the need and opportunity that we've sought to address through teacher action research. I'll touch on some of the barriers we had to uptake with reference to epistemology and also ontology. Talk about how we attract teachers to do projects, the process of action research in our context, and finally, I'll share some outcomes and my key learnings as the leader of this project. If that's something that you're interested in today, I'll make it as practical as possible. Please give me a thumbs up and we shall get started. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so Brisbane School of Distance Education is the system's largest fully online school, and we provide curriculum from e-kindy all the way up to and including Year 12 and offer the breadth of the Australian curriculum, including 27 senior subjects, applied and general, to students that are at home, overseas, in Queensland state and private schools, and so on. It's a very big school. The recent count was 3,531 students and over 270 teaching staff now, or a combined staff of 300 when we take into consideration our public service officers and also our facility staff. One of the things that has been an emerging trend in distance education globally is the attraction for students that come to us with a medical reason for enrolment. In fact, 53% of our enrolment from years 7 to 10 come to us with some sort of medical diagnosis, and most importantly, often that's to do with anxiety and stress disorders, which adds some complexity to the cohort of students that we teach each day. We offer 204 subject and year level courses through QLearn. So as you can imagine, moving to QLearn for us was akin to changing school campuses. We were the first mover, we were there for procurement and trialing, and we went full implementation from the moment it was available. And finally, we're also the system's heaviest user of educational technologies, including AI. At last count, there was 26 different products in play at Brisbane SDE. Here is my wonderful colleague, Rebecca, in the top left corner, providing some online learning. Rebecca's an English teacher, also an action researcher in the past. And you can see we've got 3 different students here. In the top right corner, you can see one of our primary school students. One of my favorite things about working in distance education is pets in the classroom. One of the easiest ways to connect with kids is who's got a cat or a dog beside them. And you can see there that that young learner's got a white cat sitting on his desk. We've got a senior student learning chemistry in the bottom left corner, and one of our beautiful e-kindy students as well. So we provide learning to students as young as 4 all the way up to 18, 19, and even 20, depending on when they enroll. So our challenge. Being a fully synchronous online school, we provide every lesson every day online to our thousands of students. it's very difficult for us to find instructional leadership and professional development for our colleagues. Off-the-shelf professional learning isn't necessarily available. And the system that we work in, although there's support for the digital tools that we use, like Teams, Collaborate Ultra, etc., what we find missing is some of that pedagogical professional development that our teachers need to feel confident and capable. And what we realise too in our leadership structure is that our executive leaders and middle leaders have, in nearly all cases, never been full-time teachers in our context, which means finding expertise has to come from the people in the classroom. But when we think about school level decision making, those that are steering the ship need to have some knowledge and insight as to what works best in our context. How do we best develop teaching capability and confidence? How do we make instructional choices that are going to get the student outcomes that we want for the thousands of children that we're responsible for? And that led us to these key questions. How can teacher-led inquiry improve staff confidence and capability? That is, how can we learn as an organisation and share that learning in ways that actually boosts teachers' self-efficacy and also improves student outcomes? How can the experience and expertise of teachers inform school-level decision-making and professional learning for staff? That is an upflow from the teaching floor to executive leaders to create things like professional development plans, collegial engagement frameworks, school policies, and so on. Or simply put, how can the learning of the few benefit the many? I thought I'd just touch on some of the literature that's informed the thinking around this, and it provides a pretty compelling reason to have teacher-led inquiry in a school just like ours. So it turns out, and this is something that you may have actually experienced when COVID moved us all to remote learning, is that when we've got teachers that are highly self-efficacious, drawing on the work of Bandura from the 70s and also in the late 90s when Bandura really started thinking about education, if a teacher is confident in their capabilities, they actually produce better student outcomes, they perform better in their work, they're more resilient, and their well-being improves. But what we learned through COVID and through the proliferation of scholarship since then is that when we transition to the online mode, there's a reported decline in teacher self-efficacy, that being their capability and their confidence. And it increases teachers' risks to anxiety, stress, and the risk of burnout. Curiously, and I might just grab my laser pointer here, years of face-to-face teaching experience is not a determinant for continuing confidence and capability when we move to the online mode. And if you reflect on your own experience, and I do when I first moved into distance education in 2017, even though I had 15 years of teaching under my belt, I was continually asking myself, yeah, but how do I do what I do best in the online mode? And we know that online pedagogy is actually distinct to face-to-face pedagogy because we've got to be able to employ those pedagogies we know work so well face-to-face, but through those online instructional strategies and also using those computer skills. And what's made clear in the literature is that the support for staff needs to be appropriate to their level of experience. And you have to have that support if you want that decline in self-efficacy to be corrected. And finally, drawing on the work of Bandura's self-efficacy theory, vicarious and mastery experiences have been shown to have the greatest impact on online teacher self-efficacy. That is, people having experts to watch and opportunities to try out their online strategies and learn whether they work. So that provides a pretty compelling reason for teacher action research. Build your expertise, get evidence of what works, and share it widely. So what do we describe teacher action research as? In our context, we talk about teachers conducting investigations into issues within their own classrooms. And the outcomes are twofold. One is to improve their practice or confidence or capability, and also the learning of their students. And critically, in learning what works and having evidence to suggest what works, we can create professional development for others, and we can have that inform school-level decision-making. Critically, it also gives us an opportunity to invite students to be participants in research where their outcomes are actually one of the positive outcomes of the projects themselves. So it's this participatory mode of research, highly qualitative. It values the experience of teachers, but also of students. So it means we've got student voice that's feeding up through the school as well. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about epistemology today was that one of the biggest barriers for action research getting off the ground initially was teachers believing that what they thought actually mattered to the school, to their colleagues, and when it came to writing PD and policy. So we talk about epistemology as justified belief. So when teachers are doing their projects, we always encourage them to think, when you figure out what works, make sure you pair it with some evidence. And that can be as simple as observations from your lessons. It can be outcomes for kids. It can be bits of work, things from lesson recordings, whatever it might be. But it's really important that we emphasize that their learning needs to stay in context. We're not about theorizing or generalizing here. We're just about reporting what worked for us so that others might adopt or adapt your learning into their own practice. Making sure that we value teachers' lived experience and that they're not doing research to students, but with students and their colleagues as well. And finally, accepting that teacher action research is cyclical, that you don't have to try one thing and it be perfect first time, that you go again and again until you're confident that the thing you're trying or the thing you're investigating is actually having the desired impact. And similarly, we talk about ontology in the context of teacher action research at Brisbane SDE as experience counting. This idea that by doing action research, you're going to be different in the end. It's actually in the reflection of how you've changed as a result of your learning that's the most important thing. And the secondary benefit, if you're willing to share your learning, is that others can improve their practice as well. We see classrooms as dynamic environments. And finally, it's this last piece in particular that what teacher action research values is the interpretation of what the teacher tried and whether it worked, including the voice of their kids, that's going to have value for the school and also their practice. And as I said, this was the biggest barrier to getting this off the ground, having teachers believe that their voice counted and they just needed to have a look at their practice in a critical way and make sure it was justified so they could share it with their colleagues. One of the other misconceptions we had about teacher action research was that it had to be quantitative, that it had to have like this positivist paradigm wrapped around it. Teachers used to come to it thinking, yeah, but I've got to get data. And that meant numerical information that they could do statistical treatments to get some sort of quantified outcome. It took a little bit of practice on my behalf in leading this to start framing it as, no, action research is about solving problems that are important to you, the practitioner in the classroom. Its intention is to improve your practice. And if we as a school learn from that, then that's just the secondary benefit. It's okay to be reactive. In the beginning, a lot of teachers would start their projects, and if it didn't work the first time, they would deem it to be a failure rather than learn from why it didn't work and then iterate on what intervention that they were using in their projects along the way. They didn't have to have a theoretical output. It was about practical learning so that it could be shared with others. So if you're thinking about leading teacher action research in your context, I'm trying to sort of speak to the things that I saw as barriers because it took me a couple of years to realize that some of these self-conceptions in staff and misconceptions about what action research was were some of the things that were getting in our way in terms of the uptake of projects and the willingness of staff as well. Okay, just take a moment to read the highly accomplished descriptor here from Standard 6.3 from the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. Give me a thumbs up when you've read it. This pretty much describes what we're wanting to achieve with teacher action research. Get colleagues talking about each other when it comes to practice and improving student outcomes. And it's important that when we finish our teacher action research projects, there's an acknowledgement from the school of the commitment teachers have made. We recognise 10 hours of CPD that they can log with their QCT for the year, and we issue certificates as well. So if they're working toward highly accomplished or lead teacher certification, they can use this as a piece of evidence. little bit blurry, apologies, but there's a lovely body of work at the moment coming out of the digital and virtual learning team in the Department of Education around evaluating where a school is in terms of its digital maturity. And one of the domains that they describe is called building expert teaching teams. And we as a school sort of self-identified as being established. And if you read this, it says the school fosters a culture of continuous reflective practice, encouraging staff to critically assess their digital competence and confidence and takes action to enhance them. And that's exactly what teacher action research does in the context of a fully online school like ours. Its aim is to get people to reflect critically, share, and it builds that culture where that's the status quo. People using their classrooms as places of their own professional learning, and it's the sharing of those outcomes that can help others across the school. If I had one piece of advice to a school leader wanting to implement something similar to this, it would be keep it simple. Reduce admin and don't expect teachers to produce volumes of text describing what they did, whether it worked, and so on. We're not aiming for outcomes that are reportable in academic journals or conference posters. Ultimately, the learning just needs to be structured and supported enough for teachers to know what they're doing so that they can go about their action research and get as much value as possible. As a school leader, my responsibility is to collate those findings and make them shareable to others in the school. So a nice simple process like this will work. Plan, act, analyze, conclude. If we break that down into some steps, this is how we can structure the support for teachers. And what we do at Brisbane SDE is we ask them to identify a practice to investigate. Now, in the beginning, I used to just say anybody can investigate any issue they want, and that's still true. However, where we found attraction was highest was when we linked the options to the school pedagogical focus for the year. And I've got a really clear example of what that looks like. And if that pedagogical focus has been chosen with teacher input, then we get lots of participation in action research. And it's really important when we offer teachers this opportunity that they come to it voluntarily. I don't think anybody can be told to be an action researcher because it doesn't become meaningful to them. So it's about attraction rather than delegation of this type of learning. Once they've got themselves a practice to investigate, they develop a research question, a plan, including an intervention. They go and try it out and collect data. As I said before, data might be samples of work, screen grabs, conversations with kids, it could be surveys, whatever the teacher deems appropriate. Evaluate those outcomes, reflect on the change they have in terms of knowledge and practice for the teacher. And most importantly for us as a whole school, it's share it in as many ways as possible so that others might adopt or adapt what they've learnt. So let's step through an example as to what that process looks like in real terms. The first thing I'll highlight today is an example focus that people can go and look at with their action research. I'll talk quickly about recruitment and communication. If there are school leaders in the room, I thought this might be especially relevant to you. I'll talk about scheduling, a program or a cohort approach to action research so that people feel supported, but also encouraged to continue in their projects. Step you through the process with an example, and then also how we share outcomes and learnings with others across the school. Alrighty, so here's an example of a focus. This is our school pedagogical model. It's got 6 parts. It looks shockingly similar to the gradual release of responsibility, if you're familiar with that. With the added piece here, one of our biggest challenges in distance education is getting kids engaged. Who's ever been in a presentation where they just mute the presenter or go on YouTube or look at their phone? Maybe happening right now, hopefully not. But that's why we have engaging in our pedagogical model. But this was the focus that we chose as a school. It was really important. Thank you, Amanda, very kind. So rather than saying to everybody, hey guys, come one, come all, choose what you like, what we said was the school's pedagogical priority is collaboration. And we'd just moved to QLearn. So we'd already got the kids in QLearn, teachers were in there, we had the assessment going, the fundamentals. But next what we thought was, well, how can we start thinking about pedagogies in this new learning management system? So we said, come on, come all. The focus is collaborating in the context of QLearn. If you want to figure that out for you and your kids, come along. We then advertise through staff notices. And I think it's really important when recruiting action researchers, particularly given that they're busy teachers, they need to know exactly what they're getting themselves in for. And I'm more than happy to share these resources with anyone who's interested. But it needs to outline the focus. It needs to be linked to the pedagogical framework and the school's AIP. The role description needs to be made clear as to what teachers will be required to do. And a timeline of commitments should be shared as well. So there's no ambiguity or guessing as to, well, how much time is this going to cost me? When am I going to fit it in? Because we commit 10 hours, we certify 10 hours of PD for this, we make sure that teachers are reasonably available for each of the workshops that we run or support sessions that we run so they get their projects off the ground. This is the schedule of support. I'll just give you a moment to read through this. Just give me an indication in the chat or with a thumbs up when you've done so. So you might ask, what is TCT? TCT stands for Teacher Collaboration Time. It's scheduled time each week, and it's defined as time for teachers to do the things they cannot do alone. That includes planning, moderation, professional learning, and so on. It's not faculty meeting time. It is school directed, but teachers have options as to what they can choose. And if you choose action research, then you can dedicate some of your TCT time to your project. It's important that people feel in part of a cohort of action researchers. So what we do is, instead of them just working independently, we get them to work on individual projects, but come together at these intervals to learn more about the process and actually share and sense check and get feedback on what they're doing, what they're learning, the data collection they want to do, and so on. So it's a nice structured program for them to consider while engaging in their project. I said before that the piece of advice I'd give a leader wanting to do this is to reduce that admin, make it as simple as possible. This is a planning template. In our first meeting, we get people to identify who they are, which singular class they're going to be focusing on, what their problem of practice is, research questions, and they identify some data collection. So here's one that I've done. Collaborations through QLearn. How can collaborations be used to facilitate peer feedback between Year 12 physics students? To what extent do students value peer feedback on assessment through collaborations? It's a function in QLearn. It's basically shared PowerPoints. I'll show you in a minute. Identify some data, how I'm going to capture it in Word. I'll issue a survey for them to do as well, because it's important for students to tell me if they value it as well. But that's what a planning slide looks like. We come together as a cohort of action researchers. We share. We give each other some critical feedback on clarity, data collection methods, and so on. Here's an example. You don't have to see all the text, but what I did is I de-identified the students' essays, just their introductions. I gave them a feedback scaffold, and they went about publicly as a class, one student each slide, writing feedback to each other using highlights. You can see my structure here is what went well on the left, the parts of the text are in the middle, and then even better if on the right. And it meant that I had visibility of the feedback that they were providing and get engagement with the strategy. And we also could then go back and look at our own, as well, the students could, to see exactly what people were saying about their work. So using QLearn, public collaboration for feedback. This is what kids said about it. Please note the last question. Remembering that teacher action research is for the teacher and students primarily. However, what we're trying to find are new practices that others might adopt or adapt. And if you give this data to other teachers, it's student voice compelling them to use this strategy in their classroom. Some anecdotal bits. Bit of feedback from me there as a teacher in the last comment. Maybe I need to explicitly teach children how to give each other feedback. But what it's telling me is that I've used this technology to facilitate something the kids care about, that they feel is improving their writing. And I'm obviously going to make my own objective judgment as to whether their writing's improved as well. How is it shared? Knowing the value of this, I created a PD session that people could opt into. 63 people came along. Because we record every lesson every day, I took video of the kids doing the strategy in the lesson. That video has been viewed 143 times. It also speaks through how to set the strategy up in class. It's been shared across 5 of our 11 faculties, and it's now a mandatory part of staff induction so people can see that collaborative pedagogies are possible in the online mode. This is now being used not just for feedback, but in all different ways. In fact, maths at the moment are using it with year 7s to get them to complete and cross-check problem solving in units in mathematics, which is pretty exciting for us too. The important story, though, is really being told by the kids. We like it, it works, we'd recommend it to other teachers. What my job is, as the leader of the action research, is to make sure that I come up with different ways to people to see what this practice is and ask them whether they want to adopt it. Let's look at another example. In the distance education sector, engagement with schooling is defined not by your attendance, but by return of work, and that is classwork and your assessment. In practical subjects, that's particularly challenging on a lesson-to-lesson basis. I have a year 4 HPE colleague who got really quite disappointed with the return of work. In fact, if you look at this data here, only 28% of work was returned in semester 1 of the year they did this project. 42 students were under this teacher's care. What did she do? She realized that she needed to be able to see each kid's practical performance every single lesson. So she thought, hang on a minute, I've got QLearn. Can I get a way for them to evidence their learning in real time? She found out there's an app from Canvas, who is the provider of QLearn. She coached parents how to use it. She built instruction manuals and videos demonstrating to them how to take a picture or a video of their kid performing a skill so that she could see it in real time. Look at the impact. In a single semester, return of work went up 92%, up to 92%, and the A to C data as a result went from 35% in the first semester to 75% in the next semester. If you put that in front of any teacher of a practical subject, that's a pretty compelling reason to figure out whether this pedagogy is for them. What have we done? We've trained parents and teachers. We turned it into videos and made them publicly available on our website for students, parents, and we've got instructional content for our staff. Every member of the school community is inducted into using this technology, and we tell this story when we do so to compel parents to use it as well. It's being widely used across practical subjects at Brisbane SDE. We come together as a cohort of action researchers, and what we do with a singular focus is we share outcomes, including barriers and opportunities that we find in the pedagogies we explore, and I consolidate them into print guidance for staff, just like this PDF, and also a suite of instructional videos that have clear examples of what was tried and whether and how it worked. That also includes some interviews with staff to just sort of explain exactly what their goal was and whether it was achieved and how they knew. We've pointed teacher action research as well at the use of generative AI, and I just wanted to show you an example of a couple of policies that have fallen out of that. This is an AI guide policy for students and an AI guide for supervisors. And that was informed by what we learned when teachers were using it in their action research projects to improve student outcomes. This is an example of those suite of videos that demonstrates to our colleagues how they can use these in different contexts. Action researchers have also gone on to present at Staff Professional Development Day workshops, weekly PD sessions in teacher collaboration time. They share at their faculty meetings, and I do some sharing as well with the senior leadership team, because sometimes these findings, like our HP example, for instance, are just too good not to share. So, in conclusion, barriers were in epistemology and ontology. Teachers realizing and accepting that their voice matters as long as it's justified and they've got some data to share, and that it's in their interpretation of their experience, the real gold is for their colleagues when it comes to professional learning. This works best when there's clear structure and support. Eliminate the admin if you can, and come up with as many synchronous and asynchronous ways to share this learning as you can. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Obviously, super fascinating for me to hear you talk about something that I witnessed you doing firsthand in school. Lovely to hear about it again. Does anyone have any questions for Ryan? Do you know if they're doing any more action research in your absence, Ryan?
My current understanding is that they are in the midst of a whole school transition to Microsoft Teams as a teaching
Oh,
tool.
yes.
What will probably follow is using action research to push the functionality of that through the different pedagogies we have in our teaching and learning framework. So, for example, the first one might be collaboration through Microsoft Teams.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So we've got a question from one of our fellow research services officers here about whether focusing on the classroom as the locus of inquiry undermines recognition of factors beyond the classroom that might
I think
impact
it's a
student learning and outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question. And I like the word locus because we can think about locus of control and locus of inquiry at the same time. It's absolutely accepted that there are things that are informing student outcomes, behaviours, engagement that are not going to be, controllable for the teacher. And I think that variability is true of any research involving young people. So we make that clear for staff. It's not about making sure that you're getting sort of anticipated outcomes or testing hypotheses with interventions. If there is variability and you can explain it, that's just part of the personal interpretation the teacher brings to their research. Ultimately, the goal is in them improving their knowledge and practice and others having the opportunity to learn from it. And sometimes the richness of those stories where they bring these complexities to the outcomes of their action research are really an important part of it too, because I think it makes it authentic,
Absolutely. And then we have a question from Susan there, Ryan, whether you know of any areas of PD um, that educators and teachers can benefit from. I assume you mean in relation to action research, maybe, Susan?
Susan, just to speak to broader PD for distance educators, one of the reasons teacher action research got off the ground in our context is we struggled to find things, particularly around effective online pedagogy. So there's a lot of wonderful stuff coming out of the department in particular when it comes to education systems engagement, understanding the tools and so on. But really, when it's about pedagogy, that's the bit of the gap. And I'm encouraged to see a lot of that work now underway in the department, particularly by the digital capabilities team. But Susan, to answer your question, that was our experience. And we sort of looked inward rather than outward to find that PD. But yeah, you can touch base with ADIS as well, the association that the DEs are in. But if you're within the department, I encourage you to engage with the digital capability stuff that's in the pipeline now.
And did you share any of the findings beyond our school or with other schools?
Um, we've shared some of the outputs, so some of the consolidated resources around QLearn. The AI outcomes or the consolidated outcomes were shared with the department when they generated their Gen AI policy. So we've shared them in that respect. We haven't shared outcomes from individual projects. They were sort of for internal use only. And in truth, we sort of encourage teachers to get them to a point where their colleagues can understand them, adopt and adapt outcomes rather than for them to be shared more broadly, if that answers the question.
I think so. So Megan's going
Sorry,
to
Emma,
contact you.
sorry about that. Emma, just to speak to that a little bit further, if schools contact me or Brisbane SDE, we've got a spirit of, one school, one system. So we share everything, all of our QLearn planning, our action research outcomes, our instructional videos. So if there's anything that you want or need that I've mentioned today, please reach out.
Does that sufficiently answer your question, Emma? Hopefully, yes. And I think Megan from QUT is going to be in touch, Ryan. You've got your next gig lined up.
Yeah, just for some colleagues that are researchers that are in our universities. In starting my doctorate last year, it's increasingly apparent to me that there's a real dearth in research in this field, this emerging field, particularly when it comes to teacher capability and confident pedagogy in online classrooms. I think there is so much opportunity for research, particularly in the 7 schools of distance education in Queensland. And because we're teaching children as young as 4. So if there's an appetite for the research out there, do reach out as well, because we're willing participants in any of that.
Excellent. Well, I think if no one has any other questions, we might wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. Wonderful presentation as always. We really appreciate your time. And thanks everybody for joining us. We will